the Heritage Foundation has produced that just look at an index of dependency. Now, let's recognize that some of the people that are receiving government benefits are ones that they've paid into. Let's be honest. People have paid into Social Security. People have paid into other kinds of things and receive Medicare. So when I talk about dependency, sometimes we're talking about two different things, but they still recognize that if all of a sudden the government were to shut down, all these people that are dependent upon the government would be in trouble. So that ranges from people receiving Medicare benefits, Social Security benefits, all the way down to people that are receiving food stamps and aid to dependent children and all of the rest. And that percentage of those people dependent on the government increases every single year and has increased rather dramatically under this last administration. And that should be some concern, because if indeed the government finds itself someday not able to meet all of its obligations, the people most hurt are going to be the people that are most dependent upon the government. And to show that in a different way, some of our listeners right now live in a state where there are very significant financial challenges. If you look at states like Illinois, California, New York, just to mention a few, they don't have the ability to print more money like the federal government does. So you do run into a situation in which those states already have to be making really tough choices about what they can pay out or whether they can meet all of their obligations for pensions or whatever that might be. And so in some respects, we're going to see over the next few years what has been happening it's already happening in various cities. I've been in a few cities this last year as I've traveled around that are bankrupt. I mean, Stockton, California, let me just pick one. I was in Stockton a while back. That city is bankrupt. It is totally bankrupt. And, well, what does that mean? Well, it means, you don't have funds for the fire department. You don't have funds for the police department. You don't have funds for the library. You have to make really serious cuts. But pretty soon we're not going to be talking about states that are bankrupt, cities that are bankrupt. We might be talking about states. And I think it just gives us a preview of what can happen if we don't get our fiscal house in order.
Yes, but like Detroit, Michigan, who is almost bankrupt, you had an alderman there say, hey, bail us out. We deserve it. I mean, we got to bring home the bacon, right? I mean, isn't that right?
But where are we bringing that money from? I mean, again, just let's, I know on radio it's really hard to get numbers in your head, but maybe we can put a few, or we can ask everybody to grab a piece of paper and just put a few numbers down to see this. The budget this last year, $3.8 trillion, 3.8. The projected revenues, $2.5 trillion. So that leaves a $1.3 trillion deficit every year. Doesn't take people very long to figure out we can't keep doing that. Or to put it a simpler way, for every $10 billion the government spends every day, $4 billion of it is borrowed, or 41%. And so you've got to keep borrowing it. There comes a point in time where already China and Saudi Arabia and Japan and UK and others saying, we're not sure we want to fund any more of your debt. So the Federal Reserve has to borrow it, in a sense, from itself. It has to just create ones and zeros on a computer. But, the implications for that aren't very good because inflation is already starting to creep up. It could really be very significant next year. So it just underscores again why we have to address some of these financial issues. And if Congress fails to do so, we're going to be in a real rough road next year.
Wow. Well, you're listening to today's issues on American Family Radio. Our guest is Kirby Anderson on Fire Away Friday. And, John, I think we ought to go to the phone lines.
We are ready to go to the phone lines, and we've got Carol from Georgia who is on the line first. Hey, Carol, welcome to Fire Away Friday with Kirby.
Oh, hey. I just wanted to make a comment. A very elderly black lady was in the line with me at Walmart one day, and she made the comment. I didn't start the conversation, she did, that this was before Obama was elected, that she wished her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would realize that he is leading them to slavery. And she pointed that out, the fact that there were men in Africa that came in and promised the people the moon and loaded them up on a boat where they were overcrowded and died from disease before they ever reached America. When they reached America, they were turned over to slavery. And she said they did it with promises that were not fulfilled. And she said, years ago when I was a young girl, they did the same thing in Germany with the Nazis. She said they were promised the moon, and what did they get? They got thrown in the furnace. She said, all Obama's doing is throwing my people in the furnace, and they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
She said, I feel so sorry for him. She said, because he's making slaves out of them.
Carol, those are great observations, and we appreciate your call today. Kirby, one of the things that she said there, and I think that it was a valid point, as people become more dependent upon government, it's hard to get away from that dependence, because if they get to the point that they can almost pay their bills, then a lot of that government subsidy goes away. And so it's easier for them to rely on the government subsidies than to reclaim their independence, isn't it?
Well, and that's one of the things that's just come out just in the last couple of days, which has caused all sorts of people some really interesting reactions, because you have right now in the Pennsylvania Welfare Department, they pointed out that a single mom with 2 kids in the state of Pennsylvania is better off taking a job paying $29,000 versus a job that pays $69,000.
Yeah.
Now, you might listen to that and go, whoa, wait a minute. How is it that you get a job that pays a little less than $30,000 and you'll do as well as if you get a job that pays almost $70,000? And that is because of all the benefits that come to you when you're in that lower income category in terms of government welfare. And I've got to applaud the state of Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, for actually publishing that to illustrate how right now we are providing so many benefits. And I think all of us, John and Jim, you and Carol, and I think every listener would say we really do believe that there is a place for us to help the helpless. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of us are tired of helping the clueless or providing a lifestyle for the clueless. You know, the scriptures talk about the fact that you are to admonish laziness and sloth and gluttony. Go to the antho-sluggard and observe her ways and be wise. Those who will not work will not eat. Whether you look in the Old Testament or the New Testament, you see that. And while I'm giving some verses, really the verse for Carol there is Proverbs 22:7, which says, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. That's how at least New International Version and English Standard Version render it. Others say as servant. So when you talk about slavery, no, it's not slavery in chains, but the Bible talks about the fact that we're in debt. We are in at least an economic slavery, Proverbs 22:7.
Yeah.
Listening to today's issues, Fire Away Friday. If you have a question for Kirby Anderson, you can call us here, and it's 888-589-8840. And it's off to Monty from Culpeper, Virginia.
Hi, Monty. Go ahead and turn your radio down, Monty, and you'll be able to talk directly to us, please.
Thank you. I just turned it off. I'm sorry. Thank you for taking my call. Hey, Kirby, I just, like I think most citizens that listen to AFR and any form of communication and commentaries, we have, for some reason, and maybe y'all can give us as a public a little better idea, why is it that the Obama administration has seemingly gotten off the radar about Benghazi and coming clear as to, when John Petraeus did his testifying, and we've been given the, between assertion and the idea that this whole thing has not been clearly brought forth to the American public. Could you just share what is it and where are we with having that administration? Of course, we always relate back to the Watergate affair, and that there was no deaths in that, but there were serious implications of criminal acts. And I just would like to hear what you might have to say. Where are we on the radar with this Benghazi issue? Thank you so much.
Well, that's a good point, and I think it illustrates again, Jim and John, why we are so supportive of what you do at American Family Radio and why we believe that we need alternative channels of communication, because somewhere along the line, it seems like pretty early along the line, the so-called mainstream media, which is not becoming so mainstream anymore, ABC, NBC, CBS said, this is really not that big of an issue. That was only brought up because of the campaign, and we're going to cut the president some slack on all all that. And so to its credit, Fox News has continued to try to cover that issue, and certainly the blogosphere has done that. And, of course, they've been criticized. I mean, there was a guest on Fox the other day and said, you just keep bringing up Benghazi. You're just an arm of the Republican Party. I'm going, no, I mean, there's some pretty important issues here, not the least of which is we're beginning to wonder whether it had something to do about moving arms from Libya to Syria and all sorts of other things, even apart from the death of our ambassador. So let's give credit where credit's due, and that is Fox News, and certainly talk radio, and some of the blogosphere has covered it. But somewhere along the line, the mainstream media, so-called traditional media, said, just not a story, nothing to see here, move on, and moved on to other issues. And it just is illustrative, again, of how our priorities are out of sync. And if I can be critical not only of the media for a minute, but of Congress, you might say, well, why doesn't Congress address this? And yesterday I had Representative Louis Gohmert in my office and in my studio, and we did a program with him for an hour, and he said, the last vote he took on Wednesday before he came to be on my program on Thursday was a vote in the Congress about whether or not to remove the word lunatic from the Federal Register. Apparently there's two laws where the word lunatic appears. And so he says, we're about ready to go over the fiscal cliff. We have $16 trillion of debt, and we're voting as to whether or not to actually remove the word lunatic from the Federal Register.
Wow.
And so they actually had a vote. It was like 300 and something to 1. Guess who the one was?
Yeah.
Louis Gohmert. So then AP actually called him and said, well, why is it that you voted against taking the word lunatic out of the Federal Register? He said, well, first of all, it's a pretty good word. And frankly, lunacy is a good definition of when we are in the midst of major fiscal crises, and we're voting to take the word lunatic out of the Federal Register. And so that got in the press. But it's just an illustration of how, whether it's the press or a lot of people in Congress are saying the values are just on top of each other. They're just completely inverted. We should be concerned about Benghazi. We should be concerned about $16 trillion in debt. We should be concerned about sequestration that might happen in January and taxes going up. But Congress is voting on things like that, and the press is talking about, Lindsay Lohan or who's, up and who's down, or, the Kardashians. I mean, that's why we need things like American Family Radio, to be perfectly honest.
Well, that's
great.
Great observation.